We all understand the feeling of running low. That specific moment in the week when the checking account balance feels brittle, nearing the point where the next mandatory expense threatens to consume the last sliver of butter. It is a familiar, silent stress that millions of Americans live with, regardless of how many hours they work. This pressure is often framed as a temporary hardship, a challenge to be overcome through hard work and planning. But for many, the challenges are not temporary. They are systemic, interlocking elements of the economic landscape itself. This is not a story about individuals failing to manage money. This is an exploration of the structural physics that make escaping poverty in modern America feel less like climbing a ladder and more like attempting to climb a constantly moving escalator while carrying a heavy weight. The question is not why people struggle when they earn less, but why it is so difficult, once you are struggling, to build enough velocity to gain sustainable altitude. Chapter 1. The Thin Margin. Poverty in this context is not defined by a specific dollar amount, but by the absence of margin. It is the distance between your monthly obligations and your monthly income. When that distance shrinks to zero, every component of life becomes critical infrastructure. For the average American household living paycheck to paycheck, the primary goal is not accumulation, it is stasis. It is successfully managing the next 30 days without critical infrastructure failure, the car breaking down, a severe illness, or a sudden change in housing status. This equilibrium is maintained only through relentless, precise execution. You must clock every hour, manage every transaction, and absorb every shock without allowing the budget to decelerate. This constant pressure consumes the very resources, time, attention, and rest that are needed for long-term strategic planning. When you earn just enough to survive, the greatest hidden cost is the opportunity cost of exhaustion. You are forced to commit maximum effort to short-term survival, leaving no reservoir for educational advancement, skill development, or the intensive job search required to move up. The margin is the shield. Without it, you are exposed, and the system ensures that being exposed is always more expensive. Chapter 2. The Cost of Being Poor. It is an economic paradox that in the United States, lacking money costs you money. Consider housing. When faced with severely limited income, the rational decision is to seek the lowest possible rent price. This often means moving to the furthest available location, trading proximity and convenience for a lower monthly sticker price. But that saving is an illusion. Lower-priced housing stock is typically older, less energy efficient, and poorly insulated. This immediately translates into disproportionately high utility bills. A newer, smaller apartment closer to the city might cost $100 more per month in rent, but save $150 in heating and cooling expenses. If your credit history is thin, you might also be forced to pay higher security deposits or installation fees for utilities, capital you simply do not possess. More significantly, distance imposes a transportation tax. If you must rely on public transit, you spend more time commuting, often navigating complex, multi-transfer routes that burn hours. If you rely on an older vehicle, you spend a greater percentage of your income on gasoline and maintenance. That vehicle is also subject to higher risk of breakdown. This means the actual monthly cost of the cheaper rent is rarely lower once the auxiliary expenses and time penalties are factored in. The immediate goal of minimizing the rent check forces the household into a location that quietly siphons away capital and time through inefficient operation. Chapter 3. The Employment Instability Trap. The American economy increasingly relies on hourly, shift-based, or contract work, where labor is treated as a highly flexible input. While this flexibility benefits businesses seeking to optimize staffing levels minute by minute, it introduces crippling unpredictability for the employee. The primary mechanism here is the lack of guaranteed schedules and the absence of paid time off. In this system, you might have your shifts cut with little notice during a slow period, immediately reducing your anticipated paycheck. Conversely, you might be required to work unexpected overtime, disrupting childcare arrangements you've already paid for, incurring secondary penalties. The most catastrophic element is the health trap. If an hourly worker contracts a severe illness, or if a child requires emergency medical attention, the worker must miss shifts. Because they generally do not have PTO, the penalty for being physically unable to work is a complete loss of revenue for that time period. This is fundamentally different from salaried work, where the infrastructure exists to absorb a short period of illness without collapsing the monthly budget. For the hourly worker, the choice is often binary: prioritize immediate health and accept financial collapse, or push through the illness, compromising health and performance, simply to ensure the paycheck arrives intact. If the financial structure is so delicate that a single missed day risks eviction or utility shutoff, the worker is effectively trapped in a cycle of overwork and stress, where personal health is constantly leveraged against financial stability. Chapter 4. The Debt Mechanism. Financial shocks are inevitable. Even in the most carefully managed budget, events like a severe car repair, a sudden copay for an injury, or an appliance failure require an immediate injection of capital. For those with established savings and access to conventional credit, these shocks are inconveniences managed by an emergency fund or a low-interest loan. For those living without margin, the systemic response is different. Because they lack the collateral, credit history, or sufficient income-to-debt ratio required by conventional banks, they are funneled toward financial mechanisms designed for rapid deployment and high risk. This includes high-interest installment loans, title loans, and short-term credit. The goal of acquiring this high-interest money is not aspirational spending, it is stability maintenance. A person does not seek a $700 loan for a luxury item. They seek it to fix the car that enables them to keep the job that pays the rent. It is the necessary cost of remaining operational. However, the cost of the loan itself becomes a fixed, high-percentage burden on all future paychecks. A $700 emergency debt, compounded at high rates, quickly escalates, guaranteeing that the small crisis of the past month becomes a steady drain on the current and future months. The interest payments now consume the small savings buffer that might have been built had the resources been available. The result is that the system forces the most financially vulnerable to pay the highest cost for capital, trapping them in a continuous cycle of repaying yesterday's crisis. Chapter 5. The Time Deficit. Time is the one universal economic resource, and the system of poverty imposes severe limits on its utility. As established, lack of capital forces people into distant housing, leading to longer commutes. A 3-hour round-trip commute means those hours cannot be used for rest, education, or necessary activities like finding supplemental childcare. This constant drain on time directly impacts the ability to seek better work. Advanced jobs, which require specialized training or degrees, often demand time spent studying after work, networking, or attending night classes. If the working American is spending 10 hours a day working and 3 hours commuting, the remaining time is critical for sleep, meals, and family care. There is no time left for upward mobility. Poverty, therefore, imposes a time deficit. The most valuable commodity, the capacity for self-improvement and long-term planning, is systematically harvested by the need to navigate the inefficiencies imposed by lack of capital. You are forced to choose the quickest, not the most efficient, solution for every daily problem, sacrificing minutes and hours that, over months and years, equate to thousands of hours lost. Chapter 6. The Interlocking Mechanism. When we observe these factors, the disproportionate costs of cheap housing, the immediate penalties for missed work, the reliance on high-interest debt, and the consumption of personal time, we see that they are not isolated incidents. They are interconnected gears in a powerful mechanism. The lack of savings prevents the stability needed to take a risk on job training. The reliance on unstable work leads directly to the debt needed to cover unpredictable shortfalls. The location necessary to lower rent consumes the time needed to apply for better employment. They reinforce each other, creating a downward pressure that demands maximum physical effort simply to maintain the current altitude. To overcome this systemic inertia, an individual requires not just hard work, but an enormous amount of unexpected good fortune, a stability streak long enough to accumulate the necessary margin to break free. But for many, the system is designed to consume that margin before it ever reaches critical mass. It requires all available resources, all the time, just to keep the lights on, year after year. It is a mechanism that requires precise, continuous effort just to keep you running in place. And when the effort falters, even for a moment, the accumulated weight ensures the drop is immediate, significant, and difficult to reverse.